Hello, my name is Dharma Santos-Santiago, and I am a student taking the Intro to Biological Sciences lab. And for my wrap-up activity, I decided to do a narrated presentation. I thought this would be the most effective approach for this activity because I thought it does a great job at communicating the connections between concepts and convey what I have learned from this course. So without further ado, let's get started. So the layout of the course is divided into 4 main parts, and these 4 parts are modeled after the units. So we have the intro unit, the cells, genetics, and evolution unit, the ecology unit, and the physiology unit. And within each unit discussion, I will discuss the highlights of the unit as well as the concepts that were taught and how they relate to one another within the unit, but also to other units. And as a whole, I think of these different subdivisions as kind of what makes up the food web of biology, if you will. I'm pulling in an ecology concept, but that's kind of how I laid out this presentation, and I hope that comes across. And to kind of display that, I did kind of make a mini food web in this slide. And for the food chain component of the food web, I thought about the specific teaching order of each unit and how, the scientific method creates the foundation, and then you learn about the building blocks of life with the cells, and then you go to ecology and then physiology. So I really thought that specific teaching order kind of mimics a food chain and a food web, but yet all these disciplines with the ecology, the physiology, the genetics, etc., are all interconnected to form this overarching study of biology, which could be translated to kind of a biology food web, if you will. And it's not a perfect example of a food web, clearly, but just kind of to create that imagery in your mind, I created this little graphic right here. So the first unit focused on setting up the expectations of the course and reviewing the scientific method. And both the topics created the foundation for how future activities should be performed, how experiments should be run, how discussions should be written and communicated within, and a lot more. Just basically kind of the flow and the integrity of the coursework of this course. And with the scientific method, it's always important to reiterate that concept even as you get older, because it's very, very important to fully understand how data comes into fruition, how it comes into creation, and anything that we base our beliefs on should be based on evidence. So it's important to understand that concept. And we ran many, many experiments throughout the course, so understanding the flow of how experiments should be run is very important. Especially with all the evidence-based activities as well, aside from the experiments, and to kind of give us an opportunity to test out our knowledge of the scientific method, we did the cricket experiment. And with the cricket experiment, there were multiple different variables you had to test out, which I thought was really important because a lot of experiments sometimes don't come out the way you expected them, or there's a hidden variable that you may not see the connection in with. So the cricket experiment did a great job at kind of reviewing the scientific method and setting up the expectations of the course. So the next unit talks about cells, genetics, and evolution. And going into the cells component of this unit, it's really important to learn about these building blocks of life, which are the cells, and how evolutionary adaptations directly affect cells, because when you understand the organelle functions and meiosis and mitosis of cell reproduction, you create a foundational knowledge for how different evolutionary and ecological adaptations impact the physicality of the organism down to the cellular level. And these cell adaptations are what is represented in our genotypes and phenotypes. So these changes that happen at the very cellular level are expressed through our genetics. So moving into the genetics component, understanding the cellular changes is important for that knowledge. And the University of Delaware labs, both of the labs, which we had to review like an onion root cell slide and whatnot, that showed us how to perform a microscopy, which we do in other labs, such as the paramecium lab later on in the summer, and how to properly, focus a microscope and how to change out slides and everything that we would do in a regular science classroom, we did through that lab. So that was really important. And the DNA activity with the strawberry extraction provided a real life application of the understanding the DNA structure and replication process. And I liked this in-person activity because it makes the material stick a lot more, because I am physically performing this experiment instead of pressing buttons on a screen. So I thought that kind of made all the material that we had learned up to that point stick a lot more in my head, because I was able to connect it to a specific memory, which is really important when we are kind of ingesting information and trying to learn as much as we can in a short period of time. And lastly, the museum tour moves us into the elevation facet of the unit, and it kind of shows us how genetics change over time based on environmental changes. And I thought this activity and this learning section was a great transition into the ecology unit, because many ecological interactions, especially the symbiotic ones like mutualistic relationships and parasitic relationships, etc., those have evolved over thousands of years. And that evolution is represented through the genetics, and those genetics are created through the cellular changes. So everything really built on top of one another very nicely in this unit. Okay, so the ecology unit was my favorite unit out of the 4 units, just because I love ecology and I love learning about different ecological interactions. That is my favorite part of environmental science, which is what I study at the University of Florida. So in the ecology unit, we learned about these interactions through different levels. So we first started at population ecology, and then we moved into community ecology. And with the population ecology, we discussed the paramecium lab, and we did that activity, which was my favorite lab out of the whole course. And that reviewed concepts like competitive exclusion principle, and how different species of a how different individuals of a population can interact with different limiting variables. So it was important to understand how interactions can be changed in such a small population, and then you take that to a bigger scale with the community ecology, when there's multiple populations of different species interacting with one another. And we kind of watched those videos of the African food webs and those different ecological interactions, such as the baboons and the flamingos, the leopards and the hyenas. And what I love about ecology is a lot of the hidden relationships, sometimes even the symbiotic ones, you don't immediately think about. So it's not until you see these videos or you do these assignments or learn about these kinds of relationships in the classroom where you're like, whoa, like these two things work together in harmony, or one is harmful to the other, or, etc., etc. Like, there's just so many different dynamics constantly happening in nature, which is why I found this unit very fascinating. And then to kind of tie the whole unit together and to bring humans into these ecological interactions, we talk about our impact. And we did that through all the different readings with the U.S. Living Green and the It Starts at Home and the chapters in the book. And the debate really got everyone's opinions out there. And it makes everything hit home, because we at one point were just a normal part of the natural cycles and relationships of organisms on this earth. We didn't play God almost. I feel like that is kind of what we've come to in some respects, because a lot of different communities and species, they evolve around us. They evolve around our existence because we make such an honestly very negative impact on this earth. If we're talking about, climate change, global warming, deforestation, species extinction, the list goes on and on. And if organisms don't evolve around our existence, they go extinct. And we this section of the unit is really important because we need to understand what we can do to help, because this isn't inevitable. Humans making a negative impact on earth, that's not inevitable. That's a choice that we make. So I really liked how this section of the unit kind of tied all the ecological interactions together and really brought in the human dimension of it into the course. So, if I'm being completely honest, the physiology unit kind of threw me off a little bit. Um, we did save the fetal pig dissection for last, which I understand, but this flow seemed a bit strange because I thought the physiology might have fallen a bit better, like next to the genetics unit, the cell genetics and evolution unit. But either way, I think it might be because I didn't perform the fetal pig dissection. I did the alternate activity, which was to do the sensory physiology experiments and then to label the reproductive system of fetal pigs. And the labeling of the dissection made me feel like I was actually doing it in person because I had to look up a lot of images, and a lot of the images were of actual fetal pigs. So even though I didn't get the full on experience, I'm good with the images. And the sensory physiology kind of brings it back to the cells genetics and evolution unit. A lot of our sensory organs are ones that have evolved over time and have developed over time, um, purely based on survival. And there's a lot of what would be the best word? There's a lot of kind of exceptions in our sensory organs, like a lot of hidden, like kind of blind spots and things like that. So it's really cool to do that experiment and to do those activities to kind of integrate the idea that nature isn't perfect, ecological interactions aren't perfect, cells aren't perfect, and to kind of have that understanding and to know that that's okay. Lastly, I kind of wanted to talk about my most important takeaways. And obviously, the knowledge of biology is kind of the most important takeaway, but things that might not be so obvious is that discussion leads to reflection. Every week, we had to do a discussion, we had to reply to people, we had to have these conversations about the material, and that really makes you think about not only kind of the textbook, what I learned this week in a very kind of analytical way, but how does this relate to other parts of my life or other kinds of sciences, natural or social? So I really enjoyed the discussion component of the course. And another thing that I took away is that all the disciplines of the social and natural sciences are connected. And a lot of these connections are hidden. So just like a lot of ecological interactions or reproductive processes that may not seem so obvious, the connections between the social and natural sciences are very much connected. And that really hit home for me in the human impact portion of the course, because when you talk about human impact, you have to also take into account how our impact on the environment affects our economy and how our impact on the environment affects social structures, social communities, and things like that. So, just in that one example, it's very clear that the social and natural sciences are very much connected, and interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary approaches are really important when we think about the solutions to certain problems and the evolution of science as a whole, and how we view about going about science and what we study, how we study it, and how we take our knowledge and connect it to different kinds of applications. Lastly, the study of biology is multifaceted. Just in respect to how this unit was set up, we covered how the course was set up, we covered physiology, genetics, cells, ecology, and within those there were so many subfacets. So simply in the framework and layout of the course is that extremely evident.